The young and the restless spoilers for weeks, the polished elegance of nice had concealed a deep, roiling storm, and at the center of it all stood Lily Winters, once poised, rational, and guarded, now disoriented, furious, and clinging to a fraying thread of reality. Her life had become unrecognizable since the moment Cain Ashby re-entered it, stepping from the shadows of the past with a beguiling smile and promises of closure, only to weave her into the very web she thought she'd escaped. The opulence of the French Riviera became a cruel paradox, a golden cage that trapped her in a nightmare curated by a man who once claimed to love her. Cain had returned not as the broken man she divorced, but as someone far more dangerous, a newly wealthy manipulator with power, secrets, and an obsessive hunger to rewrite his past failures. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation in the maze, a literal and psychological labyrinth in the gardens of an ancient villa, Lily had grown increasingly unsettled. She sensed deception in every glance, in every calculated silence, but the scale of Cain's orchestration only came crashing down when she realized that she wasn't just being lured emotionally, she was being surveilled, manipulated, and studied like a pawn on his chessboard. And she wasn't alone. Damian Cain, enigmatic and bruised by secrets of his own, had entered this equation under murky pretenses. Though his arrival had initially sparked curiosity and intrigue, it quickly became clear that he and Cain were entangled in a brutal rivalry that extended beyond family resentment or business. Their final confrontation, one that spiraled into violence under the fading light of a Riviera sunset, was not just a clash of egos but a desperate bid for survival. Lily, caught between them, was the unwilling witness to a reality more twisted than she had ever imagined. A reality where trust was a currency, and every word was laced with veiled threats. Damian fought not only for his life, but for the fragments of truth he had uncovered about Cain's ascent to wealth, secrets that could dismantle the false empire Cain had built. Blood was nearly spilled that night, and Lily's soul fractured as she realized how deep the deception ran. Amanda Sinclair, watching from the periphery, had always prided herself on her intuition. But even she had underestimated the full scope of Cain's game. Her relationship with him, once marked by cautious optimism, began to crumble as inconsistencies piled up and whispers of manipulation reached her ears. Amanda had defended him, believed in the redemption he promised, but the puzzle pieces no longer fit. Now, haunted by Damian's words and Lily's shattered expressions, Amanda found herself unraveling the details Cain had worked so hard to obscure. Was Cain the victim of circumstance, the misunderstood outsider clawing his way into legitimacy? Or had he always been this, calculating, charming, and ruthlessly efficient at erasing opposition? The more Amanda dug, the more she feared that she was never a partner in Cain's plans, merely a tool. And if that were true, she knew she wouldn't be the last to be discarded. But the web stretched farther than anyone could have guessed. Nick Newman, whose presence in Nice had initially seemed coincidental, a brief escape, a romantic interlude, a business detour, now found himself drowning in quicksand. Drawn in by friendship, pulled deeper by love, Nick had tried to remain neutral, even helpful. But neutrality was not an option anymore. Secrets that threatened not just reputations but lives had surfaced, and Nick's instinct to protect Sharon Collins had led him straight into danger. Sharon, ever intuitive, had sensed something wrong early on, and now that darkness was rising all around them, her connection with Nick was no longer about romance, but survival. Nick had hoped to shield her from the worst of it, but the truth was undeniable: they were already entangled, already marked. And the closer Nick came to confronting Cain, the more he realized that escape wasn't just difficult, it might be impossible. What had started as a tense reunion had mutated into a psychological war zone. Cain, master of appearances, continued to smile for the cameras, to charm his way through charity galas and business brunches, but behind the scenes, he was orchestrating the final act of a long-brewing revenge. The maze wasn't just symbolic, it was real. Hidden within its twists and turns were secrets, documents, recordings, false identities, and planted betrayals designed to destabilize everyone involved. He had baited Lily with nostalgia, Amanda with opportunity, Damian with resentment, and Nick with righteous anger. But the truth Cain feared most wasn't about money or legacy, it was about being exposed as a fraud. If the others pieced it together in time, everything he had built would collapse. If they didn't, someone wouldn't survive this trip to France. The stakes escalated when Amanda stumbled upon a set of encrypted files Cain had hidden on a secure drive. Documents that hinted at offshore accounts, falsified death certificates, and communication logs implicating Cain in a possible cover-up of Damian's prior disappearance. That same night, Damian vanished again, this time after a heated conversation with Lily. The villa was searched, the surrounding roads combed, but there was no trace. Lily, now fully gripped by fear and guilt, began to question whether Damian was even alive. Had Cain finally silenced his rival? Or had Damian escaped, determined to strike back from the shadows? Meanwhile, Nick made a risky decision. With Sharon's safety his top priority, he confided in Victor Newman, hoping the patriarch's global connections and cold efficiency could offer protection. But Victor, ever the tactician, saw this crisis as leverage. Rather than assist immediately, he sent a cryptic message: "In chaos, opportunities are born." Nick, enraged and desperate, realized he would have to act alone. Even if that meant confronting Cain directly, with no plan and no backup. The final days in Nice were a blur of paranoia. Amanda's loyalties shifted rapidly as she tried to reconcile the man she thought she loved with the evidence before her. Lily became increasingly isolated, her every interaction tinged with doubt and desperation. And Sharon, refusing to remain a bystander, began her own investigation, pulling threads that others had ignored, and what she found chilled her. A copy of a forged marriage license between Cain and a woman who had died under suspicious circumstances years earlier. Was it a coincidence, or another body buried in Cain's past? Then came the explosion. At dawn, a fire erupted in the villa's east wing, the wing where Cain kept his private office. The blaze was controlled before it reached the central rooms, but what remained was ash and questions. Cain claimed sabotage. Amanda suspected a cover-up. Nick suspected murder. And Sharon feared the worst, that the fire was a message, a warning to stop digging, or face the consequences. No one could prove who lit the spark, but one thing was certain: someone wanted the truth to stay buried forever. In the aftermath, Lily stood at the cliffside overlooking the Mediterranean, eyes hollow, skin kissed by the salt air, yet colder than ever. Everything she believed had been turned upside down. Cain, the man who once swore he would never lie again, had made a liar of everyone around him. Damian, if alive, was somewhere nursing wounds, or plotting retaliation. Amanda had vanished from the hotel without explanation. And Nick? He was preparing to return to Genoa City, but not empty-handed. He had one final conversation with a local contact, someone who had been watching the group for weeks. What he learned confirmed his worst fear: this was never just about love or betrayal. This was about survival, and Cain had been playing a long, deadly game from the start. As the curtain falls on the saga in Nice, one question lingers like smoke in the ruined wing of the villa: will justice ever catch up with the lies? Or will the maze of deceit remain eternal, trapping everyone who dares to enter it? Jack Abbott had spent a lifetime picking up the pieces of his younger brother's disasters, always hoping that this time, just this once, Billy Abbott would learn to build instead of destroy. But once again, Jack found himself staring down the wreckage of another impulsive storm that Billy had summoned, not out of necessity, but out of ego, pride, and some irrepressible need to ignite fires just to watch them burn. Jack had backed Billy's latest endeavor, a clean slate, a new enterprise, a chance to finally step out of the shadows and prove himself as a man of vision, not vengeance. Jack had invested more than money. He had invested faith, goodwill, and the last fragile pieces of familial trust he still clung to. But Billy, true to form, had chosen a different path, one driven by old grudges, whispered betrayals, and a thirst for retribution that clouded his judgment like smoke in a burning house. What should have been the birth of something meaningful turned into the rebirth of the same cycle Jack had tried so hard to end. And Jack was done. Done watching, done hoping, done forgiving. This time, he wouldn't simply stand aside while Billy torched every opportunity placed in his hands. No, this time, Jack would fight fire with strategy. He didn't want to destroy his brother. He just wanted to break the patterns that kept dragging the entire Abbott legacy through the mud. If Billy couldn't be saved, then maybe he could be contained. Maybe he could be taught that some lines, once crossed, come with consequences. And perhaps the best way to deliver that message was by using the one person Billy had never been able to fully control, Sally Spectra. Sally, for her part, had already grown weary of Billy's cycles, his grand ideas and grander collapses, his self-righteous crusades followed by pitiful backtracking. She had entered this connection with hope, believing perhaps her own chaotic past could find resonance in Billy's struggle. But instead of healing, all she found was exhaustion. She had fought too hard to reclaim her self-worth and redefine her future to be dragged backward by a man too stubborn to change. Jack saw this, perhaps more clearly than she realized, and that's why Sally became the center of his newest plan. Not to punish her, not to manipulate her, but to offer her a chance to be part of something smarter, cleaner, and yes, more impactful. If Billy couldn't respect Sally's voice, maybe Jack could amplify it in a way that not only helped her thrive but reminded Billy what he kept throwing away. But Jack's move didn't come without risk. Diane Jenkins, Jack's wife and a woman all too familiar with family sabotage, watched her husband simmering discontent with growing unease. Diane had fought her own demons to win back her place in Jack's life, and now she saw the same cold edge creeping into his eyes. Not towards her, but towards Billy. It unsettled her. Jack had always been the anchor, the calm, the moral compass of a family spinning in chaos. And now, he looked ready to tilt the balance, to become the player rather than the peacemaker. Diane confronted him, warned him not to let vengeance, even if cloaked in lessons, change the man she loved. Jack assured her he didn't want Billy hurt, just humbled. He wasn't seeking revenge, he was administering discipline. But Diane, no stranger to the cost of pride, knew how easily those lines could blur. Elsewhere, the Abbott name was being carried into another storm. Kyle Abbott, Jack's son, had found himself increasingly drawn to Audra Charles, a woman as ambitious as she was calculating. Their flirtation, once harmless, had evolved into something dangerous. What began as strategic proximity quickly became emotional and physical temptation. Kyle, adrift after his separation and still navigating the aftermath of family battles, found comfort in Audra's confidence, her clarity, her unapologetic drive. But what he didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to ask, was what he was neglecting back in Genoa City. Claire Newman, newly orphaned and fragile, was struggling to breathe under the weight of grief. The loss of her father had shattered the delicate progress she'd made, and what she needed most in the world right now was connection, someone who could see past her strength to the sorrow underneath. Kyle had promised to be that person once. But as he basked in the thrill of his new alliance with Audra, Claire sat alone, haunted by memories, clinging to silence and the hollow ache of absence. Holden, her distant cousin and the only one making an effort to be there, didn't know how to reach her, not in the way Kyle once could. And with every passing day, Kyle's absence carved deeper wounds. The distance between Genoa City and wherever Kyle had run off to with Audra wasn't just geographic, it was emotional, generational, and perhaps irreversible. Jack, though occupied with the spiraling Billy situation, couldn't ignore the warnings Diane had quietly dropped about Kyle's behavior. He saw the pattern, the same impulsivity, the same refusal to consider consequences, and it terrified him. What if Kyle was becoming another Billy? What if the very legacy Jack had spent decades trying to repair was slipping through his hands again, this time through his son? He began drafting letters he never sent, rehearsing conversations he never had, trying to find the words to bring Kyle back without pushing him away. Meanwhile, Billy continued to build his house of cards. Fueled by old slights and new insecurities, he gathered allies who weren't really allies, made deals with people who only fueled his worst impulses, and slowly turned his new venture into a weapon. He believed he was reclaiming power. What he didn't see, or refused to admit, was that he was isolating himself again. And Jack, ever the strategist, let him. He didn't intervene. He didn't warn. He simply waited for the right moment to strike, not with cruelty, but with precision. And when that moment came, it was surgical. Jack exposed a financial discrepancy in Billy's company, one that Billy himself had overlooked in his haste to build something flashy. The fallout was swift. Investors backed away. Partners reconsidered. And in the center of it all, Sally Spectra appeared, not to save Billy, but to save the parts of the project worth salvaging. With Jack's backing, Sally offered a restructure, a clean cut between the chaos and the potential. Billy, humiliated, refused. But the offer wasn't a request. It was a lifeline, for the company, for the name, for whatever was left of his dignity. Diane watched it all unfold with a mix of admiration and worry. Jack had been masterful. But she feared the cost. Billy, for all his failures, was still Jack's brother. And retaliation, even strategic, had a way of becoming generational. Would Billy recover? Would he forgive? Or had Jack just written the final chapter in a sibling rivalry that had already gone too far? And in the shadows of all this, a new threat loomed. Audra, ever perceptive, had noticed Jack's moves, Sally's sudden rise, and Kyle's emotional hesitation. She began quietly gathering her own leverage, not to hurt Kyle, but to ensure she wouldn't be discarded once her usefulness ended. Because if Genoa City had taught her anything, it was this: loyalty was negotiable, but power was everything. As summer burned on and secrets thickened like storm clouds over the Abbott estate, the question echoing across every corner of Genoa City was no longer who would win, but how many would survive the next fallout. In this family, love was never unconditional, loyalty was always tested, and every lesson came with a price, one the Abbotts, once again, seemed all too willing to pay.